Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Bigfoot Crossroads. Believe it or not, this is Bear. They have, for some unearthly reason, have given me the reins to the show tonight. I appreciate the fact that they did. I'm honored to be here. I hope I do a decent enough job that they may have me back in the future, so I'm not even going to politic for that one right at the moment. We've got a good show lined up for you tonight. It's good to talk to you again, Matt. How you doing this evening?
Doing okay. I'm just trying not to blow away.
Yeah, I heard tornadoes running rampant in your part of the state. Our guest tonight, he just was practically almost blown away. He had to call me about 20 minutes ago to find out if we were still doing the show or not, because he figured that his communication system was down and out and he would not get through. How you doing, Johnathan? What's everything going on out yonder in the Pacific Northwest?
Everything's going fine. I'm going good. I'm excited to listen to all of Kurt's stories.
I am too. We've got a good man on here tonight that I've met in the last 4 months. Very intellectual guy, very well-traveled. Used to be a radio disc jockey, so he has the voice for this. So that'll more than make up for my ignorance and my redneckness. We got a man from Central Oklahoma. If he reveals where he's from, I know he's not ashamed of it. I know I wouldn't be. I love Oklahoma. I love Bigfooting or boogering in Oklahoma. And I've had the privilege of getting to know him and meet him through, well, I guess this radio show and others that I've done in the past. Me and Kumbo both had done. I heard that he had listened to several of our episodes, and due to that, it kind of brought him out and forward, and since then, he sent me a couple private messages on Facebook, and me and him have communicated with each other, and we've got to be good friends. His name is Kurt Stanley from Oklahoma. Welcome to the show, Kurt.
Thank you, Bear. I'm honored to be here.
Well, before we get into a lot of everything and on the subject what everybody loves to talk about, we'd be privileged and honored if you will turn around and just give us a brief bio about yourself, or tell us what you do, what you have done, and so forth, so on, and what brought your interest up into this world of boogering to get our attention.
Well, first off, I'd like to say I sure love Matt and Jonathan's show. The Crossroads is one of the finest radio podcasts that you can get on the internet, and if anybody's been on the internet and listened to a lot of podcasts and done any kind of listening, trying to get a little information and intelligence on the subject of Bigfoot, they soon find out that there's very few that offer the same intellectual and knowledgeable experience that Crossroads offers. And Bear, you're a legend. And you are.
Well, I was just trying to get past the point you saying intellectual and thoughtful, and then you mentioned me, so that don't just mix.
Well, I think those that know you know better, and I would like to, and I just spilled the beans on you. I'm sorry, but the truth is, I had a couple of encounters, and I've done research ever since, and I've kept a Will Rogers type attitude over the whole situation by keeping my mouth shut and just listening for almost, well, a little over 20 years now. And it all started, I'm from El Reno, Oklahoma, by the way. I'm proud to say that's right dab in the center of Oklahoma. And we've had several old famous encounters and tales at one time. Most of these Bigfoot encounters were just tales, and some of these have come out to be strictly evidence. I mean, there is more evidence in some of the encounters that have been studied and examined by experts than some of the more famous ones that are well known. But my short bio is on Bigfoot, definitely. I studied, along with all the other kids around here, about the Chickenman. We were told the Chickenman exists, and it's a guy dressed up like a suit stealing chicken. And but everybody knew better. And when you talk to an old rancher or a hunter or a farmer or somebody that you really knew well, and you catch them at the right time, they go, "It ain't no man in a chicken. I've seen him when I was disking the North 40, or I was out hunting, and I saw this thing." And we all know the stories, how they go, the descriptions. And but not long after that, the Patterson-Gimlin film came out. And when that finally got produced and put into a full motion picture film, that you had to watch the whole thing until the very end, and then you got to see the what is it, how many seconds or what is it, Matt, that you get to see of the Gimlin?
I don't keep up with statistics now. It's like 53 seconds or a minute and a half, or it's not very much. It had to have been a good movie to sit there.
You had to wait till the whole ending.
Did you actually see it whenever it was released like that?
The first release, yes. And we waited in line and went in to the local movie theater here in El Reno and paid our 50 cents or $1, whatever it was then. And you watched this whole dramatization of nothing, really. You can watch it yourself on YouTube now, I believe. And at the very end of it, they show you the clip of Patty. And from then on, I've kept my eye open and studied it and this and that until my first true encounter in 1988. So that had been quite a long time. Aware of the existence of a Bigfoot, Sasquatch creature and all that, but it was 88 that I got my first glimpse of one and my first encounter, and that's about it. Is that what you wanted to hear?
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to hear, so I'm going to put everything into context, because I have talked to you before. We spoke before several times over the phone. Me and you are of the same age. I'm 55 years old. In 88, that means you was 28 years old. And if you saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, that was probably in the early 70s or 68, 69, 70, 71, 72. Me and my brother saw it in 72, I'm thinking. I was all of 12 years old. I knew them as boogers way before that film popped up. And you brought up something very interesting. You was talking about the Chickenman. Now, here I am knowing them as boogers in Mississippi. You guys are hearing of them as being the Chickenman in Oklahoma. What descriptions were they given of this Chickenman at that given point in time? And then if you would, kind of fill the listening audience in on the story of the Chickenman, because at that given time, I'm guessing that you was probably 6, 7, 8, and 9 years old as a child, correct?
That's correct. Yep. I'm just a few miles. Actually, I'm just a little over a mile from the actual Chickenman incident. And if you hear in the background right now, the old Rock Island Railroad train, not occupied by the Rock Island anymore, but it's going by, and you might be able to hear it. It's close to where I live. That creek runs right down into the river system, and nearby, the first encounter was from a couple of guys that have been on I think they've been on a radio show recently. They encountered this creature. He had been out hunting with his buddy, and he is was a at the time, a law enforcement officer. And him and his buddy were up coon hunting down here on the river, on the North Canadian River, out about a mile from where I grew up. Now that is, if you're looking at a Google map or anything, that would be 10 miles direct east of El Reno. And,
right.
And they were taking a little break and deciding if they were going to go home or keep coon hunting and drinking some coffee. And one of them smelled something, like a skunk. So he stepped out of the vehicle, had his rifle, and they pointed a light, and there was a skunk. It was a skunk in front of the vehicle. At the same time, the hair stood up on the back of his neck, and he had this strange feeling, probably law enforcement instinct, and turned to his right, and down in that river, on the other side of the river, behind a stump, was a dark mass. Now, this mass had, according to him, it had two reflective eyes. And scientifically, I won't go into that. There's plenty of information online to go into all that genre. But he thought at first that somebody had gone down there and nailed a couple of reflective lenses onto a stump along the river. Why somebody would do that, I'm not sure, but that's what he thought at first, until this thing started grunting and making noises. And he had pointed his rifle at this skunk. He was going to kill it. And instead he pointed over there to this thing. And when they pointed a flashlight over there on it, it jumped up. It stood about 8-9 foot tall. And on two legs, it made one hop off the bank down to the river bottom, which is, if you've ever been in this part of the country, Bear can back me up. That's a bare, mainly most of the year, it's a sand bar. And there's a little foot of water maybe in between, and you kind of just hop back and forth and get your feet wet, and you can travel sandbar for miles on it. And this thing did that, but he never touched water. He could just hop over 6-8 foot of this water source from one end to the other, and he headed out west. And there's all kinds of reports on that online if you look it up. It wasn't long after that one of the many instances west of there, and this is the one right here in El Reno where I live. I'm in town now. The chicken coop door was completely pulled or knocked off of the hinges, and all the chickens were killed. And this was soon after this incident that happened. And the footprints, the handprints were discovered and looked at by several different institutional experts. These guys, one of them was the director of the Oklahoma City Zoo, and they still have the door as far as I'm aware of. And the hand was determined to be a primate unknown, is the way they put it. The handprint was that of a primate in form and shape, but of a human size, or bigger. It's actually bigger than that, of course. So they looked at that for years and determined that there's something going on. Then the other reports that were coming in were of a bipedal primate working its way back and forth along this North Canadian River, and finding, like I think Bear said it in 2 or 3 different interviews I've listened to him. What do you call it, Bear? Opportunistic things to eat.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And that's about all I know about that.
Well, let's I appreciate the description you given, and we're going to go a little farther into that. We're going to play with that a little bit. Like you said in your brief beginning bio, Kurt Stanley is from El Reno, Oklahoma. People can Google it, look it up. North of the town is the northern branch of the Canadian River. It has a lot of sandbars, places in there, quicksand, the whole 9 yards. The river, depending on the flow of water, can be narrow at times, and then it can be boiling mad at times. I want you to, if you would briefly go into this. I've been to this part of Oklahoma before. I've researched out there. I hate the word researched. Let's say I've tracked out there. North of town in and of itself, of the Canadian River, the northern fork of it, circles north of El Reno. On the northern side of El Reno, though, it's a lot of scrub brush. It's not real woody. There's not a lot of trees. Most of the cover and everything is all along the creeks that flow into the North Canadian River, and all bordering the border of the river, especially on the northern side, correct?
You described it exactly.
The law enforcement officers, they was out coon hunting. We call it coon hunting. A lot of people don't know what we're talking about. That's a southern phrase. That's when you go hunting for raccoons. Chances are he had a .22 rifle or possibly a shotgun, but he mentioned a rifle. So was he, in his app description, Kurt, was he on the southern bank when he saw this thing, or was he on him and his buddy on the northern side of the river?
They were on the southern side, just back a little bit from the old Foreman River Bridge. That's like a mile from where I grew up out on the farm.
Right.
And yeah, he was just on the southern bank of the river.
So he actually put a flashlight or a spotlight on this booger on the southern bank, and then this thing jumped into the sandbar and crossed the river heading kind of northwest, correct?
He was on the southern bank. There's at the time there was and may still be a small sandy dirt road that went right along the side of it, and people would dump trash and go down there and shoot their guns and teach your kids how to shoot. That's on the southern bank. What he felt and noticed was on the north bank, right, just from the river edge, actually just a few feet. And that thing jumped from the north bank of the river onto the river and headed west. That's what happened.
So he was running upstream on the river itself, correct?
He was running upstream on the river itself. That's correct.
Right. And this was heading more towards the Southern Cheyenne Arapaho Reservation areas, correct?
That's exactly right.
Right. And out of all that area, and we're going to get into this a little bit later on because, we there's plenty of little things here we're going to play with. We'll get into an apt description of the territory north of El Reno, which we don't want a lot of people to just think, hey, I can run out there, I'm going to go vacationing in Oklahoma, let's go check this out. Which you can check it out, but you can only check it out from the safety of the highways because we are talking about tribal land for the Southern Cheyenne Arapaho Nation, and they are very strictly enforced on no trespassing in that locale, places like that. Now, the legend of the Chickenman, I don't like saying legend because I know this happened. I've seen the evidence, the physical evidence that you're discussing from the incident where this thing was probably, maybe 10 miles further to the west, more along the main highway that comes north out of El Reno. is where the Chickenman incident happened. Wasn't it just your average farmhouse or a little small property on the north bank of the river, north side of the river, where this farmer had probably a barn, some stables and sheds, and he also had a chicken coop with a chicken house, correct?
That was on the south side. That's correct.
South
it was
side.
the Palmer farm. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And this is right there by that Rock Island Line railroad trestle that crosses the river right there on the west side of that highway. Am I right?
No. It's the old 81 River Bridge is where this happened.
All right. All right.
But it's not far. Yeah, all this stuff is real close to what you're talking about. Yeah, the railroad bridge is not far from there, but this actual encounter was right there on the old 81 bridge, which you can Google. Right. I Googled it the other day, and it came up. Yeah.
I've got a question real fast. Growing up in the northeastern part, over in the Green Country area, we heard about, the Chickenman, of course, out there. Now, as a Bigfoot researcher years later, a lot of the Bigfoot activity out there is kind of centralized around the Canadian River. Now, at the time, were they attributing all this activity to just one creature? Or did they think that there might be multiples, or was it just, the Chickenman just is an individual?
Well, I think, like most media attentions, whether that be in the newspaper or on the news or anything else, they tend to this day, if you look at one, tend to scoff it because they don't want anyone looking at them saying, oh, they, believe in Bigfoot or something. It's like it's a sin or a crime. So that, yes, they still do that to this day. Any abnormality in nature, whether it be a Loch Ness monster or a Momo or a booger down where bear's at or Chickenman, it's just one. But all researchers, including anybody that has any knowledge of wildlife, knows that there can't just be one.
Right.
Right.
I was just curious if these different events surrounding the Chickenman, if it was always the description of the same creature, like
yes.
Possibly like a rogue or something that had taken off on its own.
Yes.
Okay.
About an 8-foot rogue male.
Well, what amazes me about all this is, and here's what I wanted to emphasize more than anything else. All of this happened before the Patterson Gimline film was brought to the public's attention in 1967. In other words, what I'm saying is, even the fact that this thing since then has been associated and affiliated with a quote-unquote Bigfoot or a quote-unquote Sasquatch, there was no such thing as Bigfoot Sasquatch in the time frame that this incident occurred, especially from El Reno, Oklahoma. Do you see where I'm coming from with this, Kurt?
Yeah, that's a fact. I think it was like my dad said. I go, Dad, what the hell is that? I may not have said hell, but I said, Dad, what?
Yeah, you got your mouth washed out with soap like me. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
back in the. And he said, Kurt, it's a man in a suit, and he's stealing chickens. Well, but that's not what
I can see the El Reno Police Department, which I'm sure they was the ones investigating it. Back in those days, I'm sure, I know the city limits probably exceeds the past north of the Canadian River now, but I bet back in the 60s that the city limits boundaries probably went to the river and that was it. and may even still be that way in regard to jurisdiction. But they seen and actually have the door panel that was ripped off. And, I mean, you can go to, and I'm not promoting Cryptomundo by no means, but you can type in Google search on any internet search engine and just put in El Reno, ELRENO, and then put Chickenman in there. And actually, the newspaper clipping, if you'll look in the right place, will show up. And it'll also show a photo of this handprint that was found on this chicken coop. Kirk had already mentioned that the Oklahoma zoology, or I know they have a zoo there, they checked it out. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't the University of Oklahoma check it out, you know, from Norman? I mean, everything was right in there. I mean...
They called in several experts on that whole deal. And basically, what the first person who came in was... the local law enforcement and game wardens, and they took this thing over to the zoo director at that time. His name was Lawrence Curtis, and his statement after his examination, a thorough examination, being a zoo director, I think he knew a little bit about primates, but he said, quote, the prints appear to be those of a primate. A primate is an animal like a gorilla or a man that can stand erect. The thumb of the print is unusual. Curtis says it's crooked inside, as if it were deformed or had been injured. It resembles a gorilla, he said, but it's more like a man. That was a quote from Mr. Curtis.
That's really strange.
It's not only strange, I mean, not only did they find, well, it's like Kirk had mentioned earlier, they still, from what I understand, have this door panel with this imprint still there. I don't know if in any way that they have probably destroyed it or liberated the print and all of itself. They also had people out there, fluorescent experts, that found these bipedal footprints too, didn't it, Kirk? That was coming in and off the Canadian River. Am I correct?
That's right. Yeah, they said in one statement that it appeared that it was whatever it was that made the prints was walking on all fours, and there was some footprints on the ground outside of this chicken coop, and he said whatever it was barefoot, and then he made a statement afterward, barefoot in December.
Right. And then, wasn't it about 2 or 3 weeks later, that's when everybody started disavowing this story in a lot of different ways. Wasn't that they was trying to declare that, well, we don't have Bigfoot here, because you got to remember at the time, and I'm not talking to you guys, I'm talking to the listening audience who will be listening to the show. You got to remember now, El Reno, Oklahoma, they didn't know what a Bigfoot was, didn't know what a Sasquatch was. The newspapers actually labeled this as, quote, the Chickenman, unquote. That's what this was called at the time. I'm sure it got to be, I think there was even some cartoon caricatures and things of a giant chicken walking around stealing chickens, because nobody actually knew what they was looking for or looking at. That's when the descriptions that this police officer and his hunting buddy come forward and said what they seen. Didn't you say about a month before, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, Kurt?
I believe it was just a few days.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you may be right on the time. I'm not certain of that, but it was shortly before.
Didn't people try to pass it off as a vagrant or a hobo, possibly running on the train lines that come through Oklahoma there. A lot of people don't understand. Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
As a matter of fact, there's a statement that was in the paper to, I don't know, calm nerves or however you want to look at that. But the statement, I'll read it to you. It says right here, there are no zoos in El Reno, no circuses, and no one known to be keeping a pet gorilla. In fact, the only thing in the area that keeps primates, in this case men, is the federal reformatory just on the outskirts of town.
Oh, yeah.
And this was after a man and a woman in Stillwater and a man in McAllister reported basically the same report, and they had footprints, and they've got photos of that, and they came out and investigated. Someone came from that area and investigated that, and the only thing I think they had to say about that was the only 4 native animals big enough to leave any kind of print close to that is the black bear, that being the far southeastern part of the state, and the mountain lion, which we had very few of then, the wolf, and a man. And Curtis, who's the zoo director, Lawrence Curtis, he ruled all out. He ruled them all out at the last. He said, we've shown it to several mammalogists and several wildlife experts in Oklahoma, and all agree it's a primate. And they,
what would you guesstimate the population of El Reno was back in the mid-'60s, if you just had to just roughly say off the top of your head? And I got a reason for asking all this.
Probably 12,000, maybe.
All right, and this was in the actual city limits, which it was on the border of the city limits at the northern extremities of town, correct?
That's right.
All right, now give the listeners an apt description of the land farther north of that town. I mean, I'm talking about the terrain, what kind of trees, what kind of mountains, what kind of hills, what is north of El Reno right there for this thing to escape into?
You've got a tree line. You've got to imagine in your mind, if you're from where Johnathan's from, you can't, I don't think you can imagine this, because you're used to looking out across vast acres and miles of timber. You've got to imagine here nothing but farmland. And then you've got to imagine hundreds of miles of a river system with thick brush, poison ivy, trees of different varieties that grow down through here, cottonwood, catalpa, willow, and they reach out about as far as the old farmers let them. They're gonna farm every inch of land they can, and they have. So they've cut that. If you let it go, the natural water source right there would bring that land for several miles. So it would be larger looking line, hundreds of miles of a tree line. But in this case, that's what you've got. Then you've got these out brushings, like Bear was describing earlier, where you've got open areas and dip down areas for maybe a quarter of a mile or less, and there's brush and timber growing intermittently between all this. And the Palmer Farm, and it stands that way today. It is completely engulfed and surrounded with trees. Then there's a large opening in there, which I sent actually of that to Bear, and the minute he saw it, he went, "Oh, that's a good hunting ground. Yep. Right there. You run your animals. You get a deer trapped in between all that heavy brush between the river and a tree line, and you got it. You know, you can run them down. And that's pretty much how that land looks. You may have larger areas. You'll have creek lines that run, feed, and feed off this river anywhere from every 6 miles to every 20 miles. And those tree lines will move on. There's one not far from here, right off the river. It moves up. It's got a whole tree line, areas of forest and brush that, gather in larger areas. But mainly it's that thin little line of a creek, and it runs right up into the reservation.
Right.
Just north.
Which that's Concho, correct? Concho is where the Southern Cheyenne Arapaho Reservation is, correct?
Yeah, it's just 4 miles from where I'm talking to you from.
Kind of northwest, sort of, but it's more north, correct?
Straight north.
Yep.
On
What
81 highway.
what I want to interject here, and without taking up too much time, I love Oklahoma. It's one of my favorite places that I've ever been boogering in, thanks to my very good friends, Dan Rickey and Matt Knapp, for introducing me to 2 sections of Oklahoma. Matt's from the eastern half, which is more forested. You've got the Comanche Mountains, all kind of mountains, the Winding Stair Mountains, all kind of mountainous areas in the east. But from Oklahoma City west, everything starts turning into the Wild West, in my best description of it. Actually, the Chisel Trail runs straight through to the east of El Reno. Am I correct, Kurt?
That's right. Yukon. Yeah.
Yep. And what people don't realize, they was bringing tens of thousands of herds of cattle from Texas. They crossed the Red River, heading to Kansas, to the shipping points in Kansas. Like everybody heard of Wichita and Dodge and all those places north of Oklahoma. But the Chisel Trail, which was the first cattle drive that centered straight through, at that point in time, they called Oklahoma Indian Territory, which you know how I feel about the word Indian. I think it's a derogatory term. But they would ship all these cattle straight north, and El Reno was just really a beaten down path where all these cattle used to run through. And you look at Oklahoma, I look at Oklahoma 2 ways. In the east, you've got all the cover in the world you want. But then from Oklahoma toward the west, the cover is harder to find. In other words, it's more defined in regard to trees and brush, and heavy runs mainly on creeks and off the rivers. And that's what you just described to me. And you would look at it by standing back looking at it, and you'd say, how in the hell could a booger sustain himself out here and be able to run around without more people seeing him? But it happens. And, the Chickenman is one of the very incidents that project this more so than anything. I've also done a lot of snooping around out in the western part, especially the southwest part of Oklahoma. Plus, I've also snooped around more west of there, Red Rock Canyon, all around in those type areas. I've been to El Reno several times. One of the things that brought me to El Reno was a story of the Chickenman. As recently as 6 years ago, a lady was picking up cans, empty cans like Coke cans or Pepsi cans, that people who ride that highway going north out of El Reno, they was throwing them out of vehicles, which littering. But she was picking up the cans, and she went past this old bridge we was talking about right there, almost on the same property line, with, in as a crow flies, a radius of less than half a mile where this Chickenman incident occurred in the 60s. And she had went under that bridge to look for and was picking up these cans, and she had one of these boogers come out from under that bridge, scared the hell out of her, scared the hell out of him. About the same time they seen each other, she went back east, he went west, and he hit the bottoms of the Canadian River. And that's why I had went to El Reno. And I love that whole area up there. Tell me, Kurt, right now, you had to have been, what, 6, 7, 8 years old when this occurred. What was your best recollections on how you felt about something like the Chickenman being in that close of proximity to where you was in relation to when you grew up as a child?
Well, I grew up on a farm, not unlike yourself, and there wasn't much. I think the nearest house might have been a quarter-mile away, and you grew up with every sound that you could imagine around this area. You didn't depend on some Oklahoma wildlife and game authority telling you what wildlife existed around there. You just knew it. And you could go out, and especially as a young kid, I had that high voice as a young guy does, a boy, and I could call coyotes in, and they'd yell and chatter, and you could hear the babies, the little kits and all that crying, and so we knew what was out around there. And every once in a while, you'd hear something that didn't fit in, or it wasn't quite right. And I always thought, well, there's a retarded coyote or something. We didn't know. And then when
Kirk,
this thing went down,
challenged.
Well, mentally challenged is a good word. Normally, I like to be politically correct. I was told I didn't have to be on this show, so. But
no,
that's my best description of it, Matt.
Yeah.
And Bear. You'd hear coyotes going off, and sometimes you'd hear a coyote if you'd call for him, and it sounded like a coyote, but it wasn't quite a coyote. And just recently, I called Bear on the phone. I said, Bear, I stepped out this morning. This is just a month ago, Bear?
Right. It was about a month ago when you called me.
And I said, the roosters in my neighborhood, I know where they're at. They were doing their morning, right before the sun comes up, cackling. And every time they get done, it was all of them around the neighborhood here. This last one would make his rooster call down here where I'd been looking at tracks and things recently.
Cock-a-doodle-doo.
It was not good. It was a bad impersonation.
That was a sick rooster, wasn't he?
Yeah, and that's the best thing I can say. It was like, well, he wasn't quite right about it. But no, we, it was a little spooky. I remember that. And most people around here covered it up. They still do. They don't talk about it. And until recently, when people have started coming to me and going, hey, I heard through the grapevine that you know a little bit about these things. I go, what things? I always ask them that. What things are you talking? They won't even say the word. I go, what things are you talking about? Automobiles or motorcycles? No, computers. No, Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever.
Whoa, no.
Yeah, I go.
You're one of those weird guys.
Well, yeah, and I go, why? What makes you ask? That's what I always go. I go, why do you call? I mean, did you see something, man? Did I ever see something? We were coming home the other night from a horse sale, and my wife said, the heck is that? And then the story, it's the same story. I won't go into the repetition. There's so many reports, it's just all day long. There's a large bipedal primate-looking guy. And So back then, Bear asked a question, and I'll answer it. It was blown off by my parents and other people. It's a guy in a chicken suit. I mean, it's a guy in a gorilla suit. That's what it is. That's what my dad said. He goes, "Don't worry about it, boys." He told me and my brother, "Don't worry about it. It's a guy in a gorilla suit." And I always thought, if I ever, you know, the opportunity to go out and steal chickens, I got to get me a gorilla suit first.
Yeah. I think I would have been more concerned with a guy in a gorilla suit stealing chickens.
Yeah, out there in Oklahoma where anybody's out to just take a pop shot at you. Yeah, you want to commit suicide real quick, just get in a gorilla suit, run around next to the highways up there north of El Reno, and just see how quick you'll get ventilated.